Picture this, it's 1943. The Allied bombing campaign over Germany is dying. Not struggling. Not facing setbacks. Actually dying. American B-17s are being slaughtered in daylight raids over occupied Europe. The losses are catastrophic, 20%, sometimes 30% of the bombers sent out don't come home. Entire squadrons are being wiped out in single missions. The crews call it going to the well once too often. And at these casualty rates, the well is running dry fast. The problem isn't the bombers. The B-17 Flying Fortress is a tough aircraft. The problem is that Allied fighters don't have the range to escort the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. So the bombers fly alone deep into Germany, and the Luftwaffe tears them apart. Without fighter escort to the target, the entire strategic bombing campaign, the linchpin of Allied strategy in Europe, is on the verge of collapse. The generals are desperate. They need a fighter that can go the distance. A fighter that can escort bombers all the way to Berlin, fight the Luftwaffe over the target, and still have enough fuel to make it home. What they don't know is that the solution already exists. And it came about because of a 75-cent part, a British engine, and one of the most unlikely aircraft development stories in history. This is the story of the P-51 Mustang. The fighter that wasn't supposed to exist, that almost got cancelled half a dozen times, and that ended up winning the air war over Europe. The impossible timeline. April 10, 1940. The Royal Air Force has a problem. Britain is standing alone against Nazi Germany. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. The RAF desperately needs fighters, lots of them, and they need them fast. But British factories are already running at maximum capacity building Spitfires and Hurricanes. So the RAF does something that seems insane. They ask an American company that has never built a fighter aircraft to design and build them a completely new fighter. From scratch. And they want the prototype flying in 120 days. 4 months. To go from nothing to a flying fighter aircraft. The company is North American Aviation. They're based in Los Angeles and they've been building trainers and light aircraft. Respectable work, but nothing like a frontline fighter. Their chief designer is a guy named Edgar Schmud, a German immigrant, ironically enough, and he's never designed a fighter either. Any sane company would have said no. The timeline is impossible. The risk is enormous. If they fail, they'll be humiliated and probably go bankrupt. James Dutch Kindleberger, the president of North American Aviation, says yes. But he doesn't just say yes. He makes a promise that sounds completely delusional: we can design a better airplane than the P-40, and we'll have a prototype flying in 120 days. The P-40 Warhawk is Curtiss Aircraft's main fighter. It's in production. It's proven. And Kindleberger is claiming his company, which has never built a fighter, can design something better in 4 months. The British are skeptical, but they're also desperate. They sign a contract. And Edgar Schmud goes to work. The design. Schmud doesn't have time to reinvent the wheel, so he doesn't try. Instead, he does something brilliant: he takes the best ideas from every fighter aircraft he can study and combines them into one design. From the Messerschmitt Bf 109, he takes the laminar-flow wing concept, a wing designed to minimize drag at high speeds. From the Curtiss P-40, he takes the basic layout of engine up front, cockpit in the middle, tail in back. From the Spitfire, he takes lessons about control harmony and maneuverability. But Schmud adds his own innovations. The biggest is the wing. He designs a laminar-flow airfoil that's incredibly efficient at high speeds. At the time, most fighter wings were designed for maneuverability. Schmud's wing is designed for speed and range. He also puts the radiator in a unique position, under the fuselage, behind the cockpit. Most fighters have the radiator up front near the engine, which creates drag. Schmud's design actually uses the radiator cooling air to create a small amount of thrust, reducing the overall drag penalty. It's called the Meredith effect, and it's genius. The fuselage is all metal, semi-monocoque construction. Strong but light. The cockpit is positioned high, giving the pilot excellent visibility. The landing gear is wide set for stability. And here's the critical part, Schmid designs the aircraft with range in mind from the very beginning. Internal fuel capacity is generous. The wings are designed to carry external drop tanks. Everything about the design prioritizes going the distance. The prototype, designated NA-73 by North American, is completed in 102 days. 18 days ahead of schedule. On October 26, 1940, test pilot Vance Breeze takes it into the air for the first time from Mines Field in Los Angeles, what's now LAX. It flies beautifully. The handling is excellent. The speed is impressive, over 390 miles per hour at 15,000 feet. There's just one problem. The engine is terrible. The engine problem. The prototype Mustang uses an Allison V1710 inline engine. 12 cylinders in AV configuration, liquid-cooled, producing about 1,150 horsepower. It's a decent engine. Reliable. Proven. But it has one critical flaw, it's optimized for low-altitude performance. Above about 15,000 feet, it loses power rapidly. By 20,000 feet, it's wheezing. This is a huge problem because air combat in Europe is happening at high altitude. Luftwaffe fighters are engaging bombers at 25,000 feet or higher. An Allied fighter that can't perform above 15,000 feet is basically useless for escort duty. When the first Mustangs enter RAF service in 1942, they're relegated to low-level tactical reconnaissance and ground attack. They're good at it, the Mustang is fast at low altitude and heavily armed, but this isn't what the aircraft was designed for. The USAF evaluates the Mustang and comes to the same conclusion, great airplane, wrong engine. They order some for ground attack work but show no interest in using it as a bomber escort fighter. By mid-1942, the Mustang program is going nowhere. It's a solution looking for a problem. North American has built a beautiful fighter that nobody wants for the mission that matters most. And then a British test pilot has an idea that changes everything. The 75-cent part. His name is Ronald Harker. He's a test pilot for Rolls-Royce, and in April 1942, he gets a chance to fly a Mustang at the RAF facility at Duxford. Harker is blown away by the aircraft. The handling is superb. The speed is excellent. The range is phenomenal. But like everyone else, he immediately identifies the engine as the limiting factor. And Harker knows engines. He's been testing Rolls-Royce Merlin engines for years. The Merlin is the engine that powers the Spitfire and the Hurricane, the fighters that won the Battle of Britain. It's a masterpiece of British engineering. More importantly, the Merlin has a two-stage, two-speed supercharger. This means it maintains power at high altitude. A Merlin-powered Spitfire Mark IX can fight effectively at 30,000 feet or higher. Harker files a report with a simple proposal, put a Merlin engine in the Mustang. Now, this sounds obvious in hindsight. But at the time, it's a radical suggestion. The Mustang was designed around the Allison engine. The cowling is shaped for it. The weight distribution is calculated for it. The cooling system is sized for it. You can't just swap engines like changing spark plugs. Or can you? Rolls-Royce decides to find out. They take a Mustang airframe, designated Mustang Mark X in RAF service, and shoehorn a Merlin 61 engine into it. They have to modify the cowling, redesign the radiator, adjust the engine mounts, and recalculate the weight and balance. On October 13, 1942, test pilot Ronnie Shepard takes the Merlin-powered Mustang into the air from the Rolls-Royce facility at Hucknall. The results are spectacular. Maximum speed, 441 miles per hour at 24,000 feet. That's 50 miles per hour faster than the Allison-powered version. Service ceiling, 41,900 feet, nearly 10,000 feet higher. Rate of climb, 3,800 feet per minute at sea level. The Merlin Mustang isn't just better than the original. It's better than almost every fighter in the sky. It's faster than the Bf-109. It's faster than the Focke-Wulf FW-190. At high altitude, it's even faster than the Spitfire. And here's the kicker, it still has that incredible range. With drop tanks, the Merlin Mustang can fly for over 2,000 miles. That's enough to escort bombers from England to Berlin and back with fuel to spare. The solution to the bomber escort crisis has just been found. But here's the part that makes this story legendary. The component that makes the Merlin supercharger work, the component that allows it to maintain power at high altitude, is a small intercooler device. In 1942 dollars, that component costs about 75 cents to manufacture. 75 cents. That's the difference between a mediocre low-altitude fighter and the aircraft that will win the air war over Europe. The American version. The British immediately order Merlin Mustangs into production. But there's a problem, Rolls-Royce can barely produce enough Merlins for British aircraft. They can't supply engines for large-scale American Mustang production. The solution is obvious, build Merlins in America. Packard Motor Car Company, yes, the luxury car manufacturer, has been building Merlins under license since 1941 for British aircraft. They agree to produce a version specifically for the Mustang. North American Aviation gets to work adapting the Mustang airframe for the Packard-built Merlin. The result is designated the P-51 Mustang. It first flies in November 1942. The USAF is suddenly very interested. They order 2,200 P-51Bs immediately. Then they order more. And more. By the end of the war, North American will have produced over 15,000 Mustangs. But first, they have to prove the concept in combat. Combat debut. December 1, 1943. The P-51 Mustang makes its combat debut with the 8th Air Force in Europe. The initial missions are escort duty for bombers hitting targets in France and the Low Countries. The Mustangs perform well, but these are relatively short-range missions, not really testing the aircraft's capabilities. Then, on March 6, 1944, comes the big one, Berlin. For the first time, American bombers are going to strike the German capital in daylight. It's over 600 miles from the English bases to Berlin. Every previous attempt at deep penetration raids without full fighter escort has resulted in devastating losses. But this time, P-51 Mustangs are escorting the bombers all the way. 660 heavy bombers take off, protected by 175 P-51s from the 8th Air Force fighter groups. The Luftwaffe rises to meet them, hundreds of Bf-109s and FW-190s scramble to intercept. And for the first time, they find American fighters waiting for them over Berlin. The battle is intense. The Mustangs engage the German fighters at high altitude, exactly the environment where the Allison-powered Mustang would have been helpless. But the Merlin-powered P-51 is in its element. It's faster, it climbs better, and it can outmaneuver the German fighters at altitude. The 8th Air Force loses 69 bombers that day, a significant number, but far lower than the catastrophic losses of earlier unescorted missions. And the Mustangs shoot down 82 German fighters while losing only 5 of their own. The message is clear, American bombers can now strike anywhere in Germany with fighter escort. The Luftwaffe can no longer simply wait until the Allied fighters turn back and then massacre the bomber formations. The strategic bombing campaign, on the verge of collapse just months earlier, is back on. The turning point. What happens next is the systematic destruction of the Luftwaffe. Throughout the spring and summer of 1944, the Mustangs escort bombers deeper and deeper into Germany. They fight the Luftwaffe every day. And slowly, inexorably, they grind down the German fighter force. The Luftwaffe faces an impossible dilemma. If they rise to engage the bombers, the Mustangs kill them. If they don't rise, the bombers destroy German industry. Either way, Germany loses. The casualty rates are brutal. The Luftwaffe is losing experienced pilots faster than they can be replaced. Training programs are shortened because there's no fuel for proper instruction. New pilots are thrown into combat with minimal experience and are slaughtered. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe is a shadow of its former self. On the morning of the invasion, over 11,000 Allied aircraft support the landings. The Luftwaffe manages to fly exactly 2 sorties over the beaches. 2. The P-51 Mustang didn't single-handedly win the war. But it broke the back of the Luftwaffe and made the strategic bombing campaign viable. Without the Mustang, the Allied air offensive might have failed, D-Day might have been postponed, and the war might have lasted another year or more. The legend grows. As the war continues, the P-51 becomes legendary. It's flown by some of the greatest aces in American history. Pilots like Don Gentile, who scores 21.5 kills. Chuck Yeager, who gets 11.5 victories in the Mustang before going on to break the sound barrier. Urban Drew, who shoots down 2 Mi-262 jets in a single mission. The Tuskegee Airmen, the first African-American fighter pilots, fly P-51s with distinction, escorting bombers with such dedication that they earn the nickname Red Tails from the distinctive paint on their aircraft. The P-51 is fast, it's agile, it's reliable, and it can go the distance. It becomes the standard against which all other fighters are measured. By the end of the war, Mustangs have destroyed nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat. They've flown hundreds of thousands of sorties. They've escorted countless bombers to targets across Europe and brought them home safely. And it all started with a 75-cent part that made the Merlin supercharger work at high altitude. The what ifs. Here's the uncomfortable question that historians love to debate: what if Ronald Harker hadn't suggested putting a Merlin in the Mustang? What if that test flight never happened? The strategic bombing campaign would likely have been scaled back or abandoned in late 1943. The losses were unsustainable. Without fighter escort to Berlin, American bombers couldn't effectively strike deep into Germany. Without the systematic destruction of German industry and the grinding down of the Luftwaffe, D-Day becomes much riskier, possibly even impossible. The Allies needed air superiority for the invasion to succeed. Without the Mustang breaking the Luftwaffe, that air superiority is in doubt. The war might have extended into 1946 or beyond. More people would have died. More cities would have been destroyed. The atomic bomb, instead of ending the war in Japan, might have been necessary to force Germany's surrender. This isn't wild speculation. This is what Allied planners were genuinely worried about in late 1943 before the Mustang proved itself. One aircraft, one engine change, one 75-cent component, changed the trajectory of the war. The legacy. After World War II, the P-51 continues to serve. It fights in Korea, where it's used primarily for ground attack because jet fighters have taken over the air superiority role. It serves with numerous air forces around the world well into the 1980s. But more importantly, the Mustang establishes design principles that influence every fighter that follows. Long range matters. High-altitude performance matters. You need to think about the entire mission profile, not just raw performance. The Mustang proves that sometimes the best solution isn't a completely new design. Sometimes it's taking something good and making one critical change that transforms it into something great. Today, the P-51 Mustang is one of the most recognizable aircraft in history. It appears in movies, video games, airshows. Warbird collectors pay millions of dollars for restored examples. When people think World War II fighter, they think Mustang. Final thoughts. I want you to think about this: the aircraft that won the air war over Europe almost didn't exist. If the RAF hadn't been desperate enough to ask an inexperienced American company to build them a fighter on an impossible timeline, if North American aviation hadn't had the audacity to say yes, if Edgar Schmutt hadn't designed such a brilliant airframe, if Ronald Harker hadn't test-flown that Mustang and realized what it could become, if Rolls-Royce hadn't been willing to try the engine swap, if that 75-cent intercooler component hadn't worked. Any one of those things goes differently, and the Mustang doesn't happen. The bombing campaign fails. The war changes. That's the thing about history. It's not inevitable. It's contingent. It depends on 1,000 small decisions, lucky breaks, and people willing to try things that sound impossible. James Kindleberger bet his company on building a fighter in 4 months. Edgar Schmid designed an airframe so good that it just needed the right engine to become legendary. Ronald Harker had the insight to see what the Mustang could be. And a 75-cent part made it all possible. The P-51 Mustang is proof that sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest components. That sometimes you don't need to start from scratch, you just need to fix the one thing that's holding you back. And it's proof that impossible timelines, crazy ideas, and audacious promises sometimes work out. If you want more stories about the aircraft that changed everything, we've covered the B-29 that brought Japan to its knees, the Spitfire that saved Britain, and the Me-262 that almost changed the war for Germany. History is full of aircraft that mattered. But the Mustang is special. Because it wasn't supposed to exist, and it ended up winning the war. Until next time, remember, sometimes the difference between mediocrity and greatness is a 75-cent part and someone willing to try something new.